After Jose Mourinho's time at Roma finally came to an end in January, the club decided that the interim head coach would be Daniele De Rossi. And in his 8 games as manager so far, he's won 5 games, drawn 2, both were against Feyenoord in the Europa League playoffs, and lost 1 against current table toppers Inter. It's been a really impressive start for De Rossi. The mood around the club has significantly improved, but was that really that hard after Jose left and made it really toxic? It's not really been that surprising that the club has been quite uplifted by his sacking. But why did Roma turn to De Rossi in the first place as an interim manager? Well, apart from him being a club legend and having the second most appearances all time for Roma, of course behind Francesco Totti, De Rossi is a man who always looked destined to be a coach both in his playing days and as part of his upbringing. De Rossi's father was actually Roma Primavera coach for about 18 years, and that's their youth reserve side. De Rossi actually started his pro licence in 2020 and became a part of Mancini's coaching team for the Euros for Italy in 2021. He then continued his studies with the Italian FA to help coach youth team sides and then returned to work under Mancini for the 2022 World Cup qualifiers. After that period with the Italian national team, De Rossi took his first managerial job at Spal, who were in Serie B at the time, in October 2022. But it didn't go particularly well. He was then sacked in the following February. De Rossi was arguably just in the right place at the right time for the interim role at Roma. Very few people were even speaking about him for being a replacement for Jose, but he's definitely taken full advantage of the situation that he's been given. So what is De Rossi's style? Well, he's very much moved away from the 3 at the back system that Jose used in his time at Roma, and he's kind of gone to more of a 4-2-3-1. In his 8 games so far, he's largely used that in possession and a 4-4-2 out of it. But he's also been flexible in his tactical setups, particularly in Roma's game against Torino, where they did match Torino in their 3-5-2 formation, and it worked really well, and we'll go through why that was in a second. So with that change of formation, De Rossi's also changed a couple of the personnel that he's been using in his team. First off is Milis Svilar in goal, who's been playing over Rui Patricio, who, how can I put this nicely, has been a bit crap for the last 3 years, and as Svilar has done really well under De Rossi, made a few great saves against Frosinone, played really well in the other games and made some crucial penalty saves against Feyenoord. Back 4 has largely been right back either Christensen or Rick Karsdorp, both been playing pretty well under him, and then obviously Gianluca Mancini in the right centre-back spot. You've got one of Llorente, Huijsen or Ndicka at left centre-back, who are all really good options, and at left back you've got either Angelino or Spinazzola. Then in that double pivot you've got Paredes and Cristante, who are so important to how De Rossi wants his team to play. We'll discuss that in a second. And in the 3 in front you've got Dybala, Pellegrini, who's finally coming back into the team after potentially falling out with Mourinho, people don't really know, and also having a bit of a spell out with injury. And you've got El Shaarawy on the left-hand side with either largely Lukaku or sometimes you've also got, remember his name, Azmoun up front as well. So we're going to look at how De Rossi sets up his team first in possession, and we're going to start with the second leg of the 2-leg playoff against Feyenoord. Here you can see the 4-2-3-1 really in action. You've got Mancini on the ball, left-hand side, you've got the setup, you can see the 2 wing-backs are really, really high. You've got your double pivot, even though Cristante is slightly further forward. This is after a turnover, but you can see the rotation of that midfield 3. Dybala is dropping off from the front, and you can't see Lukaku, who's holding that upfield line. You can see the kind of main setup that you get from De Rossi's side. And again, on this screenshot, you can see just how high those wing-backs are. So Christensen, over on that right-hand side, is pretty much in line with the midfield, the advanced midfielders of Dybala and Pellegrini. El Shaarawy is really high on the left-hand side because he's got cover from Spinazzola. But this is what De Rossi wants to see. He wants to see his team in possession with lots of space, creating lots of space with really high width of the wing-backs, holding that width to give the centre midfielders space, particularly Dybala in those little areas that he can really thrive in. And we also see Paredes or Cristante dropping in between the 2 centre-backs. And again, that really helps to push players forward. This is from the Inter game. You can see right at the start, you can see Angelino. He's a lot wider. You've got Huijsen, not the source, Huijsen, either side, and Mancini either side of Paredes. You see the right wing back is a lot further forward. You've got those midfield 3 who are rotating, and it really gives Roma lots of options to progress the ball up the pitch, particularly when they're holding that width with those wing backs. One thing we did know about Roma under Jose was that they were a really good counter-attacking team, and that's not changed under De Rossi. Admittedly, it's not as much of a focus, but they're still really good at undertaking that when they have the opportunity. You can see here against Feyenoord, they've just won the ball back, and you can see that they already have 4 players around Lukaku ready to make that counter-attack, ready to make those runs forward. And you can see Lukaku in this same move then has the ball further up the pitch, and you can see again that he has those 3 runners off him. You've got El Shaarawy, Pellegrini and Dybala, who all like to be close to Lukaku. And that's a really important part, considering Lukaku isn't as fast as he once was, but he needs those runners off him as he holds up the ball really well. And when we look at Roma's outer possession shape, De Rossi, like many other modern managers, has opted for a 4-4-2 pressing structure. Now this allows the front 2 to get really high and to press the opposition, either their centre-backs or their deeper midfield players. And Roma have particularly looked to force the opposition to play long because they have such physical players in their back line and in their double pivot of Cristante and Paredes. So they've got a really high chance of winning that ball back, and I think it's been a really effective way of winning the ball back so far. And they do sometimes swap in between this 4-4-2 like rigid structure and the hybrid pressing man-to-man structure. And you can see when Feyenoord have the ball slightly higher, as you can see in this screenshot, you've got man marking at the back, you've got the two centre backs and the left back marking the front forwards, but then you've also got a slight zonal area in the midfield as well. So it does show how there's slight differences in how they do defend dependent on the scenarios. And one quirk of this system is the use of Brian Cristante. Now, because Dybala's moving from like a right attacking midfield spot up into the front two of the press, Cristante has to move over to the right-hand side to cover that space. He has the physical endurance and the spatial awareness to really thrive in that role, and I think it's a role that kind of suits him because he's very physically capable. He's got a really good engine, and I think his tactical awareness is really good in this Roma squad as well. But sometimes, as I mentioned with Cristante, a lot does fall on his tactical awareness and his spatial awareness, and sometimes when he doesn't make the right decisions, it can go a little bit wrong. Here we can see that in action against Feyenoord. You can see that Brian Cristante has jumped from his man on the right-hand side to cover centrally because Dybala wasn't close enough. And then he leaves Dybala to cover his man in the space behind. Dybala then can't cover that space. He's too far away, doesn't really have the pace or the energy to make that run. And it leads to Feyenoord creating a chance from that sort of area. So it does show how it really relies on Cristante to be aware and to make the right tactical decisions for this pressing structure to really work. I touched on De Rossi's ability to be tactically flexible. So here's an example of how things changed against Torino that really shows that. If you've seen any of Torino under Ivan Juric, you'll know that they play that 3-5-2. Now, that works okay when Roma are defending against it. The 4-4-2 press kind of works against quite a lot of different formations. But when Torino are defending against you and they go man-to-man, it'd be very difficult to kind of create those chances in the way that De Rossi likes. So he slightly switched, he matched them, but also played a slightly different way in build-up that meant he got the most out of his wing-backs. In possession, this formation doesn't really differ too much to the 4-2-3-1 that Roma use typically under De Rossi at the moment. As you can see, you've got Paredes and Cristante in that double pivot, with Pellegrini slightly advanced of them. Dybala's dropping off the centre forward, who in this case was Azmoun, and you've got your wing-backs holding a lot of the width. And this screenshot again highlights how that 4-2-3-1 is pretty much what they're playing here, just with an extra centre-back. So you can see Mancini's pushed out into that right-back slot, Angelino's slightly dropped into the left-back position. You've got two centre-backs in the middle, and Christensen, who's the right wing-back, has pushed all the way into a right winger spot. And that's giving Pellegrini and Dybala all that space to work with because Christensen's pushing that back line further back and gives Roma the space to play that they really need. And when it came to pressing in this formation, Roma again pressing really high and pressing man-to-man. You can see here you've got Pellegrini coming out of the midfield, pressing the right-sided centre-back, Angelino joining him, Azmoun on the centre-back, and Dybala's covering the space on the right-hand side and forcing Torino backwards and playing the ball long, which they win the ball back from because they have Cristante, Paredes, Mancini, these players who are physically dominant and can win those balls back in those areas. One problem that Roma did encounter in this game was that the man-to-man press was kind of exploited by Torino. In this case, you can see Ndic has been dragged out of that centre-back position, following his man into the middle of the pitch. And he loses that 50-50, which results in Torino then creating a counter-attack from that position. Torino were then 4v4 against Roma's back line and create a relatively good chance from this. So it shows how important it is when you play those man-to-man systems to win those 50-50 duels and not get dragged out of position, which can happen when you're not particularly used to playing this kind of football. So De Rossi has shown so far that he does have the tactical ability to understand different games and change depending on the formation, the tactics that he's playing against. You'd argue that the one game so far where that hasn't gone as well is when they played against the world-class Inter team. They actually went in 2-1 up at half-time. They played really well in that first half, playing a similar formation like they did against Feyenoord in that 4-2-3-1, playing with Dybala and Lukaku. Roma did slightly struggle to play against Inter's press, particularly in that midfield, where the midfield three that Inter use in that 5-3-2 really kind of snuffed out a lot of Dybala's creativity and kind of closing a lot of the space that he had. And you can see in this screenshot that they really do have Dybala very much covered. You can see the space centrally that Dybala would typically operate in when the midfield would be a bit higher, but Mkhitaryan's dropped to cover him and to cover the passing lanes into him, which made it a lot harder for Roma to play directly into Dybala. And even when they played into Lukaku, Dybala was typically a lot deeper trying to pick up the ball, as you can see here, and he's too far away from the play when Lukaku does pick it up, which is really good play from Inter, and it was something that Roma did slightly struggle with throughout this game. But they did score from a really well-worked set piece that Mancini scored, and then this second goal is a well-worked counter-attack that put them 2-1 up at half-time. You see that Mancini reads the play really well, gets in front of his man, and then sets off the counter-attack. He plays a quick ball into Lukaku, who knocked it down to Pellegrini, and they're away. and they're in a 4-v-3. You can see El Shaarawy on the left, Dybala over on the right, and they create a really good chance. El Shaarawy gets the ball played out to him on the left-hand side and finishes really nicely. And it completed a really good half for Roma. They struggled in the second half with the quality that Inter had, but it was a real positive and really, I think it really backed up the good work that De Rossi's done so far with this Roma team. But all things considered, from that game against Inter, Roma did really well, particularly against Inter, who arguably are one of the top 5 best teams in Europe at the moment. Roma in this game were only the 3rd team in Serie A to score more than 1 goal against Inter, the other 2 being Thiago Motta's Bologna, who have done that twice, and the only team to beat Inter so far this season, Sassuolo, who I'd be impressed if you got that, but have since been really bad. And another thing to note from this game is that it was absolutely tipping it down, and De Rossi, much like that one kid at school who wore shorts all year round, even when it snowed, refused to wear a coat in torrential rain, which is very on brand for him. So if we take a wider look at the 8 games that De Rossi's had at Roma so far as interim coach, things that have gone well so far include Dybala, who has been one of the standout players so far under De Rossi. He scored a hat-trick against Torino, including one absolute peach from outside the box, and has been playing really well with Lukaku when he's been closer to him in the formation that De Rossi's been using at the moment. He's also got Lorenzo Pellegrini back in form and back in the team, and that's really got to do with the change of mood around the club, because it was getting a little bit toxic between Pellegrini and Mourinho towards the end of Mourinho's tenure. I'd also say the use of Paredes and Cristante together has really highlighted Cristante's carrying ability, and if you've ever seen Cristante at Atalanta, that was one of his main facets of his game that was so good, his ability to carry the ball. And Paredes gives him that solidity to carry the ball and be a really important part of either creating chances or getting in the box at the end of those chances. There are some things that still need improving at Roma. Obviously, it's only been 8 games, so the tactical familiarity with that 4 at the back, with those pressing structures, is going to need to improve over time, but they're showing the capability so far to carry out those tactics really effectively. But the main problem that De Rossi does have with how he set up this Roma team is the heavy reliance on Dybala to create chances. And it's still a risk that Dybala might leave at the end of the season. He has a clause to do so in the summer, and it's quite a cheap clause. It's about like 12 to 15 million euros. However, it does seem quite likely that he will leave at the moment, but there's always that risk. And he's been injured quite a lot recently, so if he falls out of the team for 2 to 3 months, 3 weeks, touch wood he doesn't, but if he does, then you've kind of got that gaping hole in your team and you can't create those chances. So I think it's definitely something that Roma need to look at from a recruitment perspective in the future. But at the same time, really enjoying Dybala being the main part of this team at the moment, and long may that continue. So to conclude, it's going pretty well for De Rossi so far in his first high-profile role in senior management. It was a really toxic atmosphere to come into for him, but employing a club legend is always going to lift the mood, and there was a risk of it ruining the relationship between De Rossi and the fans, but I think it's definitely going well so far, considering that people are talking about him potentially being the manager going into next season, and at the current rate, I could really see that happening. And this is all because De Rossi's playing exciting vertical football that is the antithesis, easy for you to say, of Mourinho's football that Roma have been seeing for the last 6 months, and it was really getting quite turgid. And that's the main reason that the mood around the club has been boosted. Also, the results have been pretty good, considering they've only lost 1 game against Inter and played really well against the one kind of main challenge they've had so far against Torino. They're now only 4 points outside the Champions League spots, which potentially, with Italian clubs doing quite well in the in European competitions, the Champions League could stretch to 5 clubs in Serie A this season. So there's a potential for Roma to get into that, to get ahead of Atalanta and Bologna into that top 5. So when we pair that good performance in the league from De Rossi and the drastic improvement in the positivity of the football, going away from that really turgid, fractious Jose football that we saw, I think it'd be more than likely that De Rossi stays on and becomes Roma manager full-time next season. It'd be really interesting to see how his tactical setup would change given a full pre-season and maybe a slight say in the summer recruitment. But yeah, I'd definitely like to see De Rossi in that managerial dugout next season. I think it'd be a lot of fun. But let me know what you think. Will De Rossi be the Roma manager next season? Do you think he's doing a good job so far? I think he is. But thanks for watching. Hope you really enjoyed it. Like it if you did. Subscribe if you'd like to. And I'll see you in a video very soon. See you later.